Hey everyone, it's Jill and welcome to my booktube channel. This video is going to be a reading vlog and I'm so excited to be reading a novel love story by Poston. This novel came out just this week and it's been one of my most anticipated reads of 2024. I read The 7-Year Slip really early this year. It was January, I believe. And up until literally about a week ago, it was my only 5-star of 2024. So I'm really hoping that this will also be like a really highly rated book for me. The premise of this sounds so cute because the main character gets trapped in a love story. And I just really like the magical realism elements that Poston did in The 7-Year Slip. So I'm interested to see how she's going to do that in this one. And before I get too far into this video, there will be full spoilers for this book, so just keep that in mind before you continue. But otherwise, I'm going to get this started and I'll talk to you guys soon with an update. Not that far into this, only about 66 pages, but there's actually been quite a bit that's been happening in here. So first we have our FMC and her name is Eileen, but she goes by Elsie, and she is on a road trip by herself actually, and she was supposed to be going on a road trip with her best friend. They formed this online book club and then they would meet every year, I think it was, but they all live kind of far away, so she has to drive like 16 hours I think it was. But unfortunately this year her best friend flaked because the best friend's boyfriend, I guess, booked a last-minute trip to Iceland and she thinks she's going to get engaged, so she flopped on her friend, which is kind of rude. But anyways, I guess this boyfriend is normally pretty busy with work, so it was pretty rare that he was able to get this time off. So Elsie's driving along and then she ends up finding this small town where she stays the night actually because I think it was a storm. It was raining at least. And this of course is where the MMC Anders comes in, and they actually don't get off on a great start because she almost hits him with her car, but she didn't, so that's okay. So she stayed the night and then the next morning it is bright out obviously, and she realizes, she's like, wow, this town looks so familiar. And then she's kind of interacting with different people around the town and she's like, wait, this is like strikingly similar to this town from a book series that I have been reading and I love. So it turns out Elsie actually has fallen into this fake town made up that is from her favorite romance series. And it's funny because when she's interacting with the different people in the town, she's like, wait, I know about them and I've read about them, and this is this character and this is this character and they do this and this other person does this, and she just has a lot of insight to all these people. But it's interesting because Anders is not a character from the book, so I feel like something's a little bit suspicious about him and that he knows something about this whole like kind of magical aspect of the story. And Elsie was kind of thinking the same thing too, because after meeting a few different characters she was trying to think of Anders and if he was a character in these books, but she couldn't recall his name at all or his like description or anything. So I guess figuring out what's up with that will be to be determined. But otherwise there's been a few references to past events which have normally been with her friend Prue, and I kind of got confused at first because it would go into detail about conversations that they had in the past and stuff, and the first time it happened I was like, wait, is this conversation now or did this happen in the past? I wasn't really sure. But since I've gotten a little bit more into the book, I'm a little bit more used to that happening now, and I have been enjoying this. I feel like it would be just like a perfect beachy read because it doesn't seem like the stakes, at least so far, are really high, and I feel like it's just going to be a nice, lighthearted and fluffy, fun read. I think I'll definitely be able to finish this book today. I'm halfway through now, pretty much, and so far it's been a really quick read. So there were a few times where Elsie, she mentions a guy, his name was Liam, but at the start I was like, I'm not exactly sure who this is, but then on the blurb at the back it says that imaginary men don't leave you at the altar, so then I was kind of thinking, oh, maybe that's who she's talking about and referring to, which ended up being right. So her ex Liam, they got engaged and they were about to get married, but then literally 1 week before the wedding he just called it off, which she of course was devastated about. and then he ran off with some lady from work, which is just so sad for Elsie, and she literally had to deal with the fallout all by herself. She even asked him when they broke up, she was like, well, what about the people that are coming in literally on a plane from another country, and what about this and everything planning wise? And then he was like, well, you'll figure it out. So worst person ever. But this is kind of why she likes losing herself in romance books, because her story didn't end up the way that she really expected, and unfortunately she ended up falling for an awful person. So even though it's been 3 years since that whole Liam incident, she is still kind of reluctant to go on dates. I don't think she even dated after or anything, but she just doesn't really want to get into another relationship because of that past experience. But going back to what's happening now, Anders tells Elsie that no one in the town knows that they're in a romance book, but he's the only one that kind of has that insight and awareness, and I'm really curious as to why that is. He also tries to keep driving her out of town, which I feel like there's a reason for that, and he's hiding some type of secret, but joke's on him because she literally can't leave since her car's broken down. It also turns out that he's the owner of a bookshop, and he's kind of grumpy, and I would say it's definitely the grumpy sunshine trope, because she's definitely, but then also she's kind of upset with that whole Liam situation, so she's not like super sunshiny, but anyways, he's definitely grumpy. I will say though, I haven't really been getting too many romantic vibes from this. She literally slaps, and I keep wanting to say Andy, she slaps Anders, and I was like, are they supposed to be like together after that? Because that's actually crazy that she slaps him and then they're going to be like the love interests. I also found out that she was going on this road trip for the book retreat to meet the other people from the book club, but everyone else also flaked, so she was literally just going to be alone to do her own book club, I guess, which is honestly so sad. And when she said that, I was like feeling really bad for her. I feel like this story is more so Elsie getting back onto her feet and discovering herself again after the events that happened 3 years ago. So we'll see if it gets a little bit more romantic, but so far I'm not seeing a huge connection between the two characters. But those are all my thoughts for now, and I feel like my next check-in will be when I'm about 3/4 of the way through. I'm on page 278 now, chapter 28. It's called Don't Go Chasing Waterfalls. And I feel like the vibe that I'm kind of getting from this small town is that there's like a loop and everyone's trapped in it. Just because there were many times where people were like, oh yeah, it's really quiet and it always stays like that and it will never change. And yeah, I just thought that was kind of interesting. Elsie and Anders have spent a little bit more time together. She's staying at the apartment loft, I think, above the bookstore that he owns. And it's been a few days because I can't remember if I said before, but her car broke down, so she has to get it repaired, and of course it had to take a few days for it to get repaired, so she had a few days to spend with Anders. But during these dates, I don't know why, I just haven't really been feeling the spark between Elsie and Anders, and I think it might be because at the start it was just like such a rough start, which I felt like wasn't really forgivable, especially on her part for slapping him. Otherwise though, I haven't really felt like there's a huge plot in this. It's kind of just vibes. I guess the biggest thing is that she's in this fake world and eventually will have to leave. But for some reason, I feel like Anders does live in the actual world as well, and he like goes back and forth. I don't know, I'm probably wrong. In one of the last chapters that I read, the mechanic told Elsie that her car will be ready the next day. So she's kind of actually disappointed with that because she wants to stay, and one of the other characters were like, yeah, you should stay here, like just stay here forever, which she obviously knows she can't do that, but she's kind of debating it, I think. But since Elsie and Anders kind of have a sort of relationship going on at this point, I don't know whether or not she's going to stay. I think she'll leave though, because she'll realize that staying is just like keeping her life stagnant, and she'll realize that she does have to face the real world and then move on with the things that were bothering her in the real world. But then if that does happen, then she's just going to leave Anders maybe, which is why I feel like Anders does live in the real world. So I'm not sure, but we will find out really soon, I'm sure. And it also seems like there isn't a third act breakup in this, which I actually think I prefer. And then the last thing I want to say is that this is kind of the trope of the characters end up being together, like they kissed and stuff, but then afterwards they're like both unsure whether or not the other person likes them, which is kind of an annoying trope sometimes, because it's like, just talk to each other. But that's all for now, and I'm going to finish this probably tonight, and I'll update you guys once I'm finished. It's the next day now, and I finished a novel love story last night. So it turns out that Anders is the fiance of the writer of the whole romance series that Elsie was into. And I didn't really mention it before, but it was kind of part of the story that Elsie was talking about how that author passed away. It was in a car accident, I believe. So then after that happened, I guess the fiance, Anders, he was just really upset and wanted to stay in a world where he could, I guess, reconnect with his late fiance, which is honestly kind of a strange concept, especially since now Elsie, who is like a fangirl essentially of the author, and him are like together at the end. So after he arrived in this imaginary town, he ended up staying for a few years. He meant to kind of just stay a few days, but it just ended up being that he stayed for much longer than he intended to. I was right with my prediction though, that he lives in the outside world as well, and he was also just a visitor in this novel town. And I thought what was going to happen was that him and Elsie were going to leave this town together, kind of like signifying the fact that it's time for both of them to leave the past behind and move on with their real lives in the real world. But that didn't end up happening, and Elsie ended up leaving alone, and Anders stayed for a few more weeks, I think. But then later he left and then reconnected with Elsie. I think that was a few months afterwards, after he came back into the real world. He connected with Elsie and then they ended up together. And the biggest thing for me that I was a little bit confused about was the whole magical realism aspect of how they even got in and out of this novel town. And I feel like it just didn't have the same magical feelings that the 7-year slip had. It was kind of strange because I felt like Elsie and Anders kind of just drove into this town, and then it ended up being this novel town, but it wasn't really explained how that ended up happening or like the kind of method to get into this novel town. It kind of seemed like they simply just drove in and out randomly, which was a little bit confusing to me. And I honestly didn't really have that feeling of rooting for the characters, for Elsie and Anders to be together. So then at the end, when they did end up being together, it didn't really do much for me, and I honestly just didn't really feel that much about them being together. I did like the concept though of falling into the romance story, and I liked the coziness of the town and learning about the townspeople and just the area and whatnot. But I did find that this was mostly about Elsie and her journey with moving on after her breakup, as well as her kind of accepting that her friendship with Prue was maybe going to change now that Prue has a fiance. So I would say that friendship was also a main theme, but in terms of the romance, I felt like it was more so on the back burner of the story, and it definitely wasn't a main part of the book, which was a little bit disappointing because I just loved the romance in the 7-year slip. I just thought it was so swoony, and I just loved the feelings that I had when I read that book. But overall with this book, I did think it was a cute story, but it just didn't wow me with the romance, so I just wasn't super obsessed with it. But that's okay, and I would still give this one 3 stars because it was really easy to read. Since I read this all in one day, I feel like I was pretty entertained by it at least. But those are all of my thoughts for A Novel Love Story by Ashley Poston. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you've read this book, please let me know your thoughts of it in a comment down below. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more book content, and I will see you in a new video next week. Bye guys!